She didn't lose an ordinary man, she lost the one person who loved her deeply enough to see through every mask she wore. One of the greatest mistakes a narcissistic woman makes is assuming unconditional loyalty is permanent. She becomes so accustomed to receiving patience, emotional support, reassurance, and forgiveness that she slowly stops recognizing their value. What was once extraordinary begins to feel ordinary to her. The man who sacrificed his peace to protect her emotions becomes invisible in her psychological landscape. And this is where the tragedy quietly begins. Carl Jung often spoke about unconscious patterns, those hidden forces that shape human behavior without awareness. In many narcissistic dynamics, the woman unconsciously treats devotion not as a gift, but as proof of power. The more a man tolerates, the more she believes he will never leave. His consistency becomes interpreted as dependence. His empathy becomes interpreted as weakness, and over time she stops asking herself a dangerous but necessary question. What happens if the one person who truly loves me finally reaches his limit? Because every human being has a limit. A man can love deeply and still become exhausted. He can forgive endlessly and still wake up one day emotionally disconnected from the pain that once controlled him. This is what narcissistic personalities often fail to understand. They assume love survives without nourishment. They assume loyalty renews itself automatically. But psychologically, when someone repeatedly gives without receiving emotional safety in return, the soul begins to retreat inward for survival. And when that man finally walks away, something unexpected happens. The narcissistic woman often does not immediately miss him emotionally. She misses the certainty of his presence. She misses knowing someone would always answer the phone, always reassure her, always absorb the chaos she created. What she truly regrets is losing access to unconditional emotio, NAL supply disguised as love. But by the time she realizes his value, his silence has already changed him. The painful truth is this: genuine loyalty is one of the rarest things a human being can offer another person. Once it is destroyed through manipulation, neglect, or emotional exploitation, it rarely returns in the same form. And many people only understand the value of sincere love after they have exhausted the heart that carried them. Never take consistent love for granted. The rarest people are not the loudest ones, they are the ones who stayed when leaving would have been easier. A narcissistic woman often makes a fatal psychological error. She confuses emotional restraint with weakness. When a man remains calm during conflict, forgives betrayal, or continues loving her despite emotional turbulence, she may begin to believe he lacks the strength to leave. But in reality, restraint and weakness are not the same thing. In many cases, restraint is the highest form of strength. Carl Jung understood that human beings wear masks to survive socially. The narcissistic personality becomes deeply attached to control because control protects the fragile ego underneath. And when someone loves them unconditionally, they unconsciously test that love again and again. Not because they feel secure, but because internally they are terrified abandonment is inevitable. So they provoke, manipulate, withdraw affection, create confusion, and push emotional boundaries to measure how much power they truly have over another person. The tragedy is that a good man often mistakes this behavior for emotional woundedness rather than emotional manipulation. He believes more patience will heal the relationship. He thinks if he proves himself enough, the chaos will eventually disappear. So he tolerates disrespect. He accepts emotional inconsistency. He suppresses his own pain to maintain peace. And slowly the narcissistic woman begins to interpret his endurance as proof that he will ever leave. This is where her illusion becomes dangerous, because psychologically, every human being reaches a moment where self-respect becomes more powerful than emotional attachment. A man who once begged for connection can suddenly become emotionally detached after years of feeling unseen. And when that shift happens, it shocks the narcissistic personality. She never prepared for the possibility that the person she controlled emotionally would one day become indifferent to her approval. Indifference is what she fears most. Not anger, not arguments, not emotional reactions. Indifference. Because anger still contains emotional attachment. But indifference signals the complete collapse of psychological control. The man no longer seeks validation, explanations, or reconciliation. He sees clearly now. He recognizes that love without respect eventually becomes self-destruction. And this becomes one of her deepest regrets, realizing too late that the man she underestimated was not with. He was simply patient. He was not incapable of leaving, he was hoping things would change. But once a patient man emotionally disconnects, he rarely returns as the same person again. Never mistake kindness for weakness. The strongest people are often the ones who remain gentle long after life gave them every reason to become cold. One of the harshest realities a narcissistic woman eventually faces is discovering that attention and emotional security are not the same thing. Attention is easy to obtain. Admiration is everywhere in modern society. Compliments, validation, desire, and temporary fascination can always be replaced. But genuine emotional safety, the kind created by a loyal man who truly cares for your well-being, is extraordinarily rare. And many people realize its value only after losing it. Carl Jung believed that human beings are constantly searching for wholeness, yet many confuse external validation with inner stability. A narcissistic personality often depends on the heart, vilely on admiration from others, because it temporarily silences deeper feelings of insecurity, emptiness, or emotional fragmentation. This is why attention becomes addictive. It creates the illusion of worth without requiring true vulnerability. But admiration cannot comfort the soul in moments of isolation. When she loses the man who gave her consistency, protection, patience, and emotional grounding, she slowly encounters a painful psychological truth. Many people may desire her, but very few genuinely care about her suffering. Very few will stay during emotional chaos without expecting something in return. Very few will sit beside her during moments where there is nothing glamorous left to admire. The man she lost was not simply providing affection. He was providing emotional stability. He listened when she felt overwhelmed. He reassured her when fear consumed her mind. He absorbed emotional storms that most people would have walked away from immediately. And because his love became predictable, she stopped recognizing how rare it truly was. This is one of the great ironies of human psychology. What heals us consistently often becomes invisible to us. Only after the relationship collapses does she begin comparing others to him. She notices the difference between superficial charm and genuine presence. She notices how quickly transactional relationships fall apart when difficulties arise. The people who once surrounded her for excitement, beauty, status, or entertainment disappear when emotional responsibility enters the room. And suddenly, the man she once overlooked becomes unforgettable. Not because he was perfect, but because he offered something increasingly uncommon in modern life: emotional sincerity. A person who truly wants your peace, not merely your attention, is one of the rarest connections you will ever encounter. The tragedy is that many people spend years chasing admiration while neglecting the very relationships capable of giving them emotion, meaning. But admiration can entertain the ego while still starving the soul. Never confuse being desired with being deeply valued. One feeds your image, the other protects your humanity. One of the deepest regrets a narcissistic woman experiences comes when she realizes the man she lost was quietly building her life while she was slowly draining his. This dynamic rarely happens all at once. It develops gradually, almost invisibly, through emotional imbalance. He gives more energy, more patience, more reassurance, more understanding, while receiving less emotional nourishment in return. And because he loves deeply, he convinces himself this sacrifice is proof of commitment. But there is a dangerous psychological truth here. A relationship cannot survive when one person is constantly pouring while the other is constantly consuming. Carl Jung spoke often about the importance of balance within the human psyche. When imbalance becomes extreme, the unconscious eventually forces correct. Ion. In relationships, this correction often appears as emotional exhaustion. The man who once carried the relationship begins to feel spiritually depleted. His motivation weakens. His peace disappears. He slowly loses connection with himself because all his emotional energy is being invested into stabilizing another person's emotional world. Meanwhile, the narcissistic woman may not even recognize the damage occurring. She becomes accustomed to his emotional labor. His support feels automatic to her. His sacrifices become expected rather than appreciated. And this is where many people make a tragic mistake. They assume the strongest person in the relationship requires the least care. But even the strongest minds break under prolonged emotional neglect. The irony is that while he was helping her grow emotionally, financially, socially, or psychologically, he was quietly abandoning his own needs. He delayed his healing to rescue hers. He silenced his pain to protect her comfort. He could ride burdens that were never fully his to carry. And eventually something inside him changes. Not because he stopped loving her, but because survival finally demanded self-preservation. Then comes the moment she never expected. She sees him thriving without her. The same man who looked emotionally exhausted in the relationship suddenly becomes focused, peaceful, disciplined, and emotionally alive again. His confidence returns. His purpose returns. His identity returns. And this creates a painful realization for her. The relationship was not weakening him because he lacked strength. It was weakening him because he was giving too much of himself to someone who did not value the cost. Nothing unsettles a narcissistic personality more than watching someone they once drained become powerful again without their presence. And this becomes her regret, not simply losing him, but realizing too late that he was the source of stability, growth, and emotional grounding she depended on all alone. NG. Never build another person's life so completely that you abandon your own. Love should expand your spirit, not slowly erase it. One of the most psychologically disturbing experiences for a narcissistic woman is not losing a man physically, it is losing her emotional influence over him. Because in many narcissistic dynamics, control does not operate through open domination alone. It operates through emotional dependency. The ability to trigger reactions, create confusion, withdraw affection, and still remain the center of someone's emotional world becomes a form of psychological power. And as long as the man continues reacting, chasing, explaining, defending, or seeking closure, the connection remains alive in her mind. Carl Jung understood that human relationships often become unconscious power struggles when individuals lack inner wholeness. A narcissistic personality frequently seeks control because control creates temporary relief from inner insecurity. If someone constantly seeks your approval, fears your rejection, or revolves emotionally around your behavior, it creates the illusion of superiority. But this illusion only survives while emotional access remains open. The moment emotional detachment occurs, the entire structure collapses. This is why a narcissistic woman is often deeply unsettled when the man she once controlled emotionally becomes calm, distant, and emotionally unavailable to manipulation. He no longer argues. He no longer tries to prove his worth. He no longer reacts to mixed signals or emotional games. And most importantly, he no longer needs her validation to feel complete. That shift changes everything. Because emotional control depends on emotional participation. If one person emotionally exits the psychological game, the power disappears instantly. The narcissistic woman suddenly faces something she spent years avoiding: irrelevance in the emotional world of someone she once dominated psychologically. And this creates a profound internal crisis. She may attempt to reconnect through nostalgia, guilt, seduction, apologies, or indirect emotional testing, not always because of genuine transformation, but because the loss of influence damages the ego itself. The silence of a man who once loved deeply becomes unbearable because it reflects a truth she never wanted to confront. She is no longer emotionally important to the person she once controlled. Nothing wounds the ego more than replaced significance. But what makes this transformation so powerful is that the man himself also changes during this process. He begins recognizing how much of his identity was trapped inside emotional dependency. He sees how often he sacrificed dignity for temporary affection, and for the first time he experiences peace without needing constant emotional approval from someone else. This is the moment real freedom begins. Not when you stop loving someone entirely, but when your emotional stability no longer depends on their behavior. And that becomes one of her greatest regrets, realizing too late that the man she thought would emotionally orbit her forever has finally reclaimed ownership of his own mind. The moment you stop needing validation from those who manipulate your emotions is the moment you become impossible to control. Perhaps the greatest regret a narcissistic woman eventually faces is realizing she lost the one person who truly saw beyond the mask she spent her entire life perfecting. Because beneath the confidence, charm, beauty, control, or emotional intensity often exists something much more fragile: a deep fear of being genuinely known and still rejected. Carl Jung believed that every human being develops a persona, a social mask designed to gain acceptance, admiration, or protection from the world. But the more disconnected a person becomes from their authentic self, the more exhausting this performance becomes internally. In narcissistic personalities, this mask often grows so powerful too that they begin depending on it for survival. Their worth becomes tied to appearance, validation, status, or emotional control rather than genuine connection. And yet, despite all of this, sometimes a person enters their life who sees through the performance completely, not with judgment but with understanding. The man she lost may have recognized her contradictions, emotional wounds, insecurities, fears, and self-destructive patterns, yet he stayed. He saw both the strength and the brokenness underneath. He offered acceptance in places where she expected abandonment. And this kind of emotional recognition is extremely rare because most people only love what is easy, polished, or beneficial to them. But being fully seen by another human being is both beautiful and terrifying. Because once someone truly understands you, manipulation becomes more difficult. The mask loses some of its power. And this creates an internal conflict within the narcissistic personality. Part of her desire authentic love, while another part fears the vulnerability required to maintain it. So she sabotages the very connection capable of healing her. She tests it, controls it, distances herself from it, or damages it emotionally before it can threaten the protective identity she has built for years. Then eventually, the man leaves, and only in his absence does the full realization begin to emerge. Many people may still admire her appearance, desire her attention, or enjoy her charisma. But very few will ever understand her deeply enough to love the person beneath the performance. Very few will offer emotional patience without hidden motives. Very few will recognize both her darkness and her humanity at the same time. That is why his absence becomes unforgettable. Not because he worshipped the mask, but because he cared about the person hidden behind it. And this becomes the final tragedy. She spent so much time protecting herself from vulnerability that she destroyed the one connection. Where she no longer needed to pretend. A person who truly sees your soul and chooses to stay is one of life's rarest gifts. Lose that carelessly, and no amount of attention will ever fully replace it.